all for attending. It is my distinct honor to introduce our next event, where we will have a fireside chat with General David Petraeus and Jamie Montgomery. General Petraeus joins us after a long and distinguished career, nearly 4 decades of service in the United States Army, where he was a combatant commander at multiple general officer levels, and also served with distinction as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency at a time of considerable developments in the global war on terror. General Petraeus really had a distinguished career where he was first in most of the things that he did as an Army officer, and that continued throughout his career, and he has joined the KKR Global Institute as its chair, where he's been leading for about a decade there. My first experience with General Petraeus came in 2005, when I was a bright, shiny new captain assigned to the Multinational Security Transition Command in Iraq, where I focused on political military affairs. And at that time, General Petraeus, who was a lieutenant general, was in charge of developing the ministerial capability and the Iraqi security forces. I experienced there how he was able to really approach these complex, complicated, strategic, operational, and tactical problems with incredible acumen and a depth of understanding of the complexity of the geopolitical and historical elements that shaped the everyday existence in Baghdad. It was there that we learned how to think not only about what is the immediate issue set, but what was the fourth order impact of the solutions we were considering and trying to implement on the ground. And I think that those lessons that I learned as a young captain and that General Petraeus has continued to refine and hone at the strategic and most senior levels of government and service are well-founded for the discussions of the topics here today, where we are in an era of rapid geopolitical change, extraordinarily quick-paced technological change, and an evolution of threat actors and adversaries that has consumed much of the time that we've spent in the past 2 days of panels. AI, emerging technologies, and the landscape that is shaping all of us on a daily basis with the geopolitical situation is going to present for a very interesting and insightful panel. And so I would like to, without further ado, introduce General Petraeus and Jamie Montgomery, who of course needs no introduction, to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
David, she left out the part that you introduced her to her husband.
I know. I can't believe that.
All right.
You know, she not only got a number of medals for her tour out there, she also
got a husband. Now, I got to tell you, I first heard about you 1982, my summer job. I was paired with this retired Army general, Bill Knowlton, who was your father-in-law.
He was, yeah.
And he was an amazing guy.
Married the boss's daughter.
Well, yeah, but he spoke so highly of you. So eventually,
he was what I wanted to be.
Well, you that soldier, and more. So
soldier, scholar, statesman.
No, yeah, okay. He was incredible, and he was the commandant, right? Is that
he was superintendent?
Superintendent at West
guy.
Point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Look, let's try to make it a little bit human. But I think everyone here has one issue on top of their mind right now. The last week is Ukraine. So can we unpack Ukraine a bit?
Sure.
You were just there. You were at the Munich Security Conference. You watched what happened this last week. What insights could you share with us on Ukraine?
Well, first of all, if you look at the situation in Ukraine, by and large, the Russians continue to achieve incremental, but quite incremental gains on a daily basis at extraordinary cost. I wish that we'd provided even more to Ukraine so that they could even change that dynamic so that Putin would realize that he couldn't achieve additional gains at acceptable cost. We're not at that point. But they have done a magnificent job. You're doing a lot of tech and all the rest of that here in the course of this conference. Yeah. Ukraine is on the bleeding edge of not just unmanned aerial systems, they're on the bleeding edge of unmanned maritime systems, of unmanned ground systems.
Right.
Most of their logistics now to and from the front lines and the rear is actually it's on remotely piloted vehicles because it's so lethal with so many drones overhead. They are doing something that we cannot remotely do, nor can any other country in the world, although Russia is constantly trying to evolve here as well. And they're using AI already in a variety of different ways for route planning and fusing intelligence to tell the drones where to go and so on. But they manufactured over 1.5 million drones last year alone.
Right.
Do the math. They are throwing thousands of drones, mostly aerial, at the Russians on the front lines every day, hundreds into Russian territory every day, and that's going to pick up pace. I always spend time with a unit. It's all publicly known. It actually has a website. It's called the Nemesis Battalion. It's now the Nemesis Regiment, just in the last 6 months since I was there. And that was my 5th trip, by the way. So I've watched this remarkable progress. Of course, nothing concentrates the mind like fighting for your survival, for your very independence. And that's what they're doing. There is a degree of war weariness in the population that is a little bit more marked in the past. And there's a recognition that they may not get what it is that they really wanted to get, which was to liberate all the territory that Russia has taken all the way back since 2014. There was huge anticipation, of course, about what a meeting with President Trump might result in, the whole minerals deal. I think it is a good thing to have the U.S. invested in Ukraine. Not that there actually aren't already all kinds of American companies that are invested. I always do a dinner with the American Chamber of Commerce while I'm there, and there's plenty of that. But this would be a strategic investment that could be very useful. The challenge now, of course, is that with the hopefully temporary cessation of U.S. assistance and the cutoff of intelligence, which it's publicly known helps guide the attacks into Russian territory on a nightly basis, that's very worrisome, needless to say. I hope that we can get things mended here now, that the relationship can come back together. What it has done, I will tell you, it has spurred the Europeans in a way that has never happened before. I had, just as a general officer, 1-star, 3-star, and 4-star commands in operations, where I was also a NATO officer. I'd been the speechwriter for the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, many other assignments. John Allen, my great wingman and friend, also had a 4-star NATO job. We've never seen anything like this. And so there is some good that is coming out of this, considerable good. The question is, what damage does it do to NATO, which at the end of the day is founded on the U.S. capability. Right. And as we look at some kind of peacekeeping, I'm not sure why they use the term peacekeeping. That's what you do when you're in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there are 3 warring factions that you literally have to keep from fighting each other again. I spent a year there as well. I was the chief operations there and then also in Haiti. A lot of bad guys we needed to keep down so that they could actually move on with what it was we were trying to do. So I don't know what boots on the ground do unless they're on the front lines and ensures that European soldiers are going to get killed. That could concentrate the mind on the Russian side as well, not knowing what it would be. The real question, I think, and to be fair to President Zelensky, what he was trying to raise in the Oval Office is the issue of a security guarantee. This all comes down. You can assume sort of what a possible ceasefire might consist of. I don't want to give away the way some others have given away all the negotiating leverage before you actually sit down at the negotiating table. But if the guns fall silent, if it's roughly along the lines, create some kind of demilitarized zone, look, the Ukrainians are more than capable of keeping the peace in their country if the Russians stop shooting at them and conducting operations against them. And again, I've sort of tried to work through what would be a credible security guarantee. It really ideally would be a U.S. foundation of capabilities that can, from the air and from the ground, hit Russians if they break the ceasefire, together with NATO allies, just as we did, for example, again, in Bosnia, where we bombed them to the Dayton Peace Agreement, or in Kosovo, similar thing. Without the U.S., this is a much dicier affair, and I think Putin might well test it. But again, I don't see it as, it's nice, I think, to say we're going to put troops on the ground. That's a great gesture. If they're back, somewhere around Kyiv or wherever, I don't know what that really does to deter Putin. What you need is a retaliatory capability that is so substantial that he doesn't test it. But by the way, if you cock that weapon, you got to be willing to pull the trigger. And that's the real question here. And without the U.S., that's vastly more challenging for Europeans. Again, I've been in a number of different NATO operations, and at the end of the day, it's always the U.S. foundation that is what really helps bring it all together. We even have a 3-star headquarters in eastern Poland that could easily be the joint task force, turn into a coalition joint task force. We have lots of aircraft in the region that could actually be effective in that regard. You do it with long-range stuff. The lethality of the air defenses is so extraordinary on the front lines that neither side is flying aircraft in at this point. So there's no traditional close air support. And in fact, while artillery is still very important, it really is becoming a war of remotely piloted systems. By the way, one of the huge achievements of the Ukrainians was that they sank 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet without having any Navy. How'd they do it? Aerial drones that found the ships out in the Western Black Sea, and maritime drones that they designed, manufactured, and employed that sunk them. And have pushed them all the way out of the Western Black Sea. And just about all their ships have had to withdraw from the port they've occupied for centuries.
And opened up shipping, the grain route.
That allows shipping of the grain, which is crucial to food security in North Africa. Keeping in mind that Ukraine still is 25% of the world's grain exports. It's a huge...
25%?
25.
Where does most of that go?
Exports.
Where does that go to? Middle East, primarily? Egypt?
Primarily North Africa. Egypt is hugely dependent on this. But then also other countries in North Africa in particular.
The army in Egypt runs the bakeries, right? And
well, they
ever want a coup?
Don't get me into the distortions in the European or the Egyptian economy. That is one of the challenges that they have.
But if you want to have a government fall, you just have a bread shortage that does it, right?
That's why the Army got into the bread-making business. The problem is they've never gotten out of it.
Never got out of it.
And that's
it's only been a couple thousand years. I mean,
You know, it's 30 to 35% of the economy is in the military's hands or in the hands of retired senior officers.
Well, so...
Not a great way to run an economy.
No.
And one of the challenges that they obviously have.
Bread and guns, they go together. All right, so what about... Do we see something like Korea with a DM,
Well, it could be. The problem is that we don't have what we have in Korea, which is 35,000 American troops along, reasonably close to the front line.
Well, it's a long front, too.
This is a huge front.
800-mile front,
The idea could be, if the governments are willing to do this, you put in a brigade each that's about 4,000 troops from, say, UK, France, Germany, and then others that are willing to contribute. The Australians are willing to put troops on the ground. And then you put them back from the major 3 avenues along which the Russians have been attacking. But are you going to get into it with the Russians? That's the question. And that is a huge... And that's one that soldiers will not make, obviously. This is one of those that... This is where, when you're in uniform, you say, well, with great respect, that's a political question.
Well...
I hope... So let me just wrap this up. I hope this cessation is short-lived. I'd like to see the investment agreement. It's not the be-all and end-all. It'll take a... There already is plenty of extraction going on there. But again, I'd welcome that. I very much need to see the intelligence sharing turn back on.
So what happened last week? Was it, or this was a couple of days ago? What happened? Was this a Trump negotiation, or is it was he?
I'd like to think that it was a negotiating
just pissed off
tactic.
at Zelensky because he's meeting with Blinken and Rice, or what triggered all this?
Look, I think that it was someone who is not of the stature of, say, the Prime Minister of UK and France, doesn't have the same skill, particularly in English, as the UK Prime Minister, couldn't offer a visit to his country signed by the King, and really, I think, just got under his skin, and then J.D. Vance came at him. I've never been in the Oval Office, John, I don't know who else, I've never seen a vice president actually say anything. If it's, no, well, you generally don't. I mean, the boss is speaking, and so I thought that, of course, we've never, ever seen anything like what took place there. But I think it grated that he, who is so dependent on the United States, had the temerity to raise the issue of a security guarantee, which is of emphasized here, it is all about the security guarantee.
Yeah.
This can't just be 2 or 3 years for Putin to take a knee, refurbish his forces, and then go at it again, which is what he's already done. And again, Zelensky went on a bit about this, reminding them that, that Budapest memorandum didn't turn out real well. That's where the Ukraine, right after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, was leaned on by the US, UK, and Russia to give up the nuclear weapons that were still on its soil. But we agreed that we would maintain its security. Obviously, that didn't work out well. After the 2014 occupation of Crimea and the southeastern portion of Ukraine known as the Donbass, there were a lot of European assurances, signed agreements again with Putin, and obviously those have been broken. And a reminder that Putin, to whom we're making advances and so forth, again, not only generally doesn't keep his word, he's a pretty brutal individual.
Yeah, he's like Stalin in a way.
Very much so. And the Stalin, actually, they are putting Stalin monuments back up in the occupied areas of Ukraine right now. And keep in mind, it's really important, I think, that we occasionally don't listen as carefully as we should to people like Putin. He was asked, what was the worst geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century? A lot to choose from. World War I, World War II, the Great Depression. And his answer was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. That gives you a little insight into this twisted, revanchist, and revisionist version of history that he embraces, which does not allow for a sovereign country.
He's told us what he wants to do.
He does.
Yeah, he's told us.
And he's going to keep doing it. And, if he's ever able to do that, Moldova is next, and that'll go. And then we're
the Baltics.
And we're into Lithuania.
Yeah. All right.
By the way, I didn't, Stephanie, thanks for leaving out of your introduction of me the reminder that I was runner-up for Person of the Year by Time Magazine in 2007 to Vladimir Putin. And I'm actually...
Maybe they'll take it back,
Well, I'm also very proud to have been sanctioned by Putin in the fall of 2022 for my ardent support.
He would have sanctioned you earlier if you'd beat him for the award.
Oh, it might have been worse than that. I'd have to watch out for umbrellas on sunny days.
Yeah, exactly.
Stay away from 2-story windows.
Yeah. All right, so you're in Munich for the security conference. What's the mood in Europe?
It's the opposite of what it has been in every other Munich security conference, maybe except for last year.
Right.
In the past, and I started going when I was a young major, I was, again, the speechwriter for the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. It was a really small little friends and family affair, sort of like your conferences used to be when I used to go to them. And they'd shut down a whole hotel and have 400 people in a room. But in any event, in the past, it has always been the U.S. is really serious. The Europeans are not sufficiently so. We're beating them up because they're not spending whatever the increment was. It was 2% of GDP on defense per an agreement at a NATO summit in Wales some years back. Last year, that changed. First of all, of course, there's been no greater gift to NATO than Vladimir Putin. He set out to make Russia great again. What he's really done is make NATO great again, at least up until now. 2 countries that were historically neutral right on his border, of course, his northern flank, joined NATO. And
they're well armed.
Actually, we had both of those under our command in Afghanistan, and they're both very, very highly educated, well-trained, great kit, and very professional. I will note that one of them had a modest caveat at that time that they could not conduct offensive operations, and that was a little limiting. But not to worry. We gave that unit
unless someone stole their fish.
We gave them a company of 82nd Airborne Division paratroopers
who took care of that.
Who are by nature offensive. They would go out and get in a fight, and then this country's contingent would happily go to the rescue.
There you go.
But
all right.
But this year at Munich Security Conference, it was the Europeans who are serious, and they've gotten much more so just literally in the last few weeks. And it was the Americans who seemed to be a little bit feckless.
And not engaged.
And uncertain trumpet.
All right, David, you started to touch on it. You recently wrote a best-selling book, Conflict, The Evolution of Warfare, from 1945 to Ukraine in October 2023.
And now it's Gaza.
Now Gaza.
The second edition.
Second edition is Gaza.
The back of the room for whatever happy people we get to.
Yeah,
get there
we've
first.
signed a number of signed copies. David's here. We bought hundreds of copies. We can always buy you more. Proceeds are going to one of your charities.
A bunch of different veterans.
Yeah,
charities.
which is terrific. We're happy to support more of that as well. But if you had a...
When you're a partner at KKR, you can make those kind of gestures very easily. You know, I've learned since leaving government over the last 12 years, of course, that the highest calling in life after government service is the private equity industry.
Well, you know.
I mean, venture capital is okay,
we were joking, you know, that the secret to success in the tech world is appoint an Indian as CEO. So, yeah, maybe we could do that in Ukraine.
Yeah. You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment.
I say that. But it's there's a lot of things we learned this week. We're fortunate to be in a situation to help others, and I think we've been through it here locally with the fires and responding community, but you've done it on a national scale, Dave, and I think all of us should just give you a round of applause.
It's a privilege. Thank you. Thank you.
So, what would be in the latest chapter, Gaza? I asked General Allen earlier and General Yadlin if they would like a pager. And they gave me a pretty dirty look. But
it has to be one provided by the Israeli-owned company.
Exactly. Yeah.
Masquerading, selling it directly to. You know what they did.
We're wearing these little things.
That is the most
no pagers.
Most brilliant supply chain operation since the Trojan horse. Much better and a bigger impact. No, they didn't just decapitate the leadership of Hezbollah. They decimated it.
Yeah.
And then they destroyed the final communications means because all the walkie-talkies blew up the next day and they'd already gotten off their cell phones.
Yeah.
So what it did was it rendered Hezbollah incapable of doing what we all feared most, and that is using a huge number of their missiles, rockets, drones, and so forth simultaneously to overwhelm the very sophisticated air and ballistic missile defense or rocket defense of Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, Patriot, THAAD, et cetera, which was possible. And that was a big concern. And they just rendered that just not possible and then carried out an intense, methodical campaign that took them down from probably 150, 140,000 such missiles, rockets, drones, projectiles, down to, I'd suspect, 10, 15,000. I don't know if Amos Yadlin can give me a thumbs up or not, but you know, it's some in that neighborhood. This is an extraordinary achievement. And then you have the serendipitous collapse or overthrow of the regime in Syria, the murderous Bashar al-Assad, and all of a sudden Iran can no longer resupply Hezbollah because they've lost the ground line of communication that used to run from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, and then down into Bekaa Valley and down into southern Lebanon. So it's going to be very hard for them to rearm. They might be able to smuggle some money to them through various ways, including through air from Turkey or something like that. But that's much different from the massive quantity of arms and ammunition and material and so forth.
They destroyed the factories they had going.
And they've destroyed the factories
in Syria
as well, the air bases and so forth. And so really a huge achievement. I hope that we, as well as Israel, will conclude that we should try to support those who are in Damascus. I got it. The HTS was, formerly an Al-Qaeda. In fact, the leader of it was actually enjoying my hospitality during the surge in Iraq.
3 square meals, exercise.
3 square meals, best medical care, and it was in one of our detention facilities.
Exactly.
But give him credit. He's the conclusion that their constitutional committee came to is that they're going to guarantee minority rights. And if that big idea is actually implemented, that is massive. Because this is a country through which many of the tribal, the religious, the sectarian, and ethnic fault lines run, just as they did through Mosul in Iraq when it was a two-star.
So next session with General Yadlin, who ran Israeli intelligence.
Then we'll talk about Gaza.
We'll talk about Gaza there.
That's where Amos and I may see it a little bit differently.
All right, well, that's going to be
because I don't believe that they have pursued the right campaign plan to achieve the three objectives they have right now, which is destroy Hamas, never allow Hamas to govern again, and get all the hostages back. And I believe there should be a fourth one, which is to make life better for the Palestinian people in Gaza without Hamas being in their life.
Yeah.
And to do that, you don't do a counterterrorist campaign, you do a counterinsurgency campaign.
Which is...
That's a big deal.
Big difference. It's something that you really pioneered the thinking in America on. We'll come to the Middle East with that next session. Let's talk maybe, when many of us think about national security, perhaps it's China that's our biggest rival rather than Russia.
Well, it is. I think it's all China all the time in many different spheres, in the economic sphere as well, and trade and
technology, AI, quantum.
Severe competition, as Jake Sullivan used to describe it, and our job, military's job in particular, but really all of government has to ensure that severe competition never erupts in actual confrontation.
Right.
For those in the business world here, I think many of us have tried to think through how do you de-risk this, how do you all the rest of that. You can de-risk Russia, you can de-risk Ukraine, and we did at KKR in 2014, and then again in late 2021. It is really hard to de-risk the global economy blowing up.
Right.
And that's what could happen if we ever came to blows in that region. And so deterrence rests on two elements. The first is the potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities, and we need to transform those more rapidly, and a lot in here know that and are engaged in that. And the second is the potential adversary's assessment of your willingness to employ those capabilities. And this is, by the way, in the book, Andrew Roberts, now Lord Roberts of Belgravia, that needy little district of London.
Belgravia is a nice place to be the lord of. Better than some rural northern English town.
But again, we repeatedly note in the book that what you do in one part of the world reverberates in others. And in fact, I was in the office of the Prime Minister of Singapore, in my hat as partner at KKR, when the red line in Syria turned out not to be a red line. And he said, you know, General, that reverberates out in this area, South China Sea, et cetera. We saw a withdrawal from Afghanistan that was really not necessary.
That was bad.
It was and then carried out abysmally. And I think that was a factor that led Putin to think that he could invade again and get away with it. To their credit, by the way, I'm non-political. I don't even register to vote. I talk to members of either party. And I think that the previous administration did an very impressive job leading the response to that, but did a terrible job in making decisions quickly so that the capabilities that desperately were needed got into the hands of the Ukrainians where they could be most effective.
All right, we'll talk about Taiwan.
So but on this, if you don't continue to support Ukraine, what does that tell China about our willingness to support Taiwan in its hour of need?
That they win the long game.
So again, this issue of what you do here actually matters over there. This is why I've never bought the line by those that say, well, we should be focusing completely on the Indo-Pacific. Forget this other place, forget this other Mideast or whatever, focus there. By the way, actually, to set up the next session, there were three what we called Central Command truths, CENTCOM truths. The first is that in the Middle East, never, ever forget who your enemies are and who your friends are. Iran is our enemy. It wants to destroy Israel, force us out of the region, et cetera. Of course, Israel, other Gulf states, and so forth are friends. The second is to recognize that what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. Las Vegas rules don't apply there. They tend to spew violence, extremism, instability, and a tsunami of refugees. So again, you got to keep an eye on these two. And then the third one is that the U.S. trying to leave the Middle East is like Michael Corleone trying to leave the mafia. You just keep getting sucked back in. So just recognize it, just agree, keep the force there. Stop trying, and by the way, it scares the daylights out of our friends, it delights our enemies, and then we have to go back in anyway. So much better to keep a reasonable footprint.
The cost of deterrence
is
well worth it.
It actually, you know, and somebody, actually I was did an American Chamber of Commerce podcast the other day, and it was titled, what is the price of I guess it was peace in Ukraine or something like that, or what sustaining Ukraine? And I said, the price of not doing it
Yeah.
would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
So obviously you understand my sentiment on this.
I got you. All right. Well,
I can expound further if it's
no,
not clear.
well, I think we're, Taiwan, how does that play out?
Well, again, I used to teach economics, and you never begin an answer without saying it depends. And it does depend.
On one hand.
It depends on transforming our capabilities.
Yeah.
And again, very simplistically, we have to transform from a small number of very large platforms,
Yeah.
heavily manned, incredibly capable, exorbitantly expensive, and increasingly vulnerable.
Right.
Nowadays, you're approaching a situation where if you're on the surface of the water and above,
Yeah.
you can be seen. If you can be seen, nowadays you can be hit.
Yeah.
And that means you can be killed. So we've got to transition. Some of those are great. I loved having 2 entire aircraft carrier task forces in Central
Yeah.
Command when I was the commander. But you've got to transition a fair number of those to a massive number of unmanned systems that
Right.
increasingly will not be just remotely piloted. They're going to be algorithmically piloted.
Yeah.
And the man in the loop is going to become the man on the loop, or the person on
Right.
the loop, who's actually identifying what the mission is for that machine. And again, under the water, surface of the water, air, ground, outer space, cyberspace equivalent, you name it. And inevitably, we're going to go to a situation where, of course, AI is going to write the algorithm
Yeah.
with some inputs from a human being, and then it's going to actually guide it when it's actually performing its mission. And it's going to be linked with all the others and
Right.
sensors and shooters. And
All right, well, that-
the
so-
Chinese are already experimenting with a system in which the human is not in the loop.
Right.
It's all machines. They're merging all of the intelligence and reconnaissance and surveillance that they get. And again, they're programmed, and when they see a certain signature or certain action, they automatically launch themselves these drones and so forth.
Right.
That's going to be the future of warfare. You can
Yeah.
see this coming in Ukraine at an incredible
Yeah.
pace. By the way, one of the reasons I was there 2 weeks ago was to attend an expo of unmanned systems, and I've never seen anything like it anywhere.
All right, well,
Just true
so we have a lot of entrepreneurs here. Many of them are focusing increasingly on the defense industry. What advice do you have for them?
Keep at it.
Keep at it.
Seriously.
We need it,
No,
yeah.
look, there was a period after Snowden
Yeah.
where the relationships were ruptured.
Yeah.
I remember, I think was it Microsoft that wouldn't do Project
Google,
Maven?
yeah,
Or was it
Google,
Google?
yeah.
That was a huge blow. Because prior to that, we had a relationship that I could call the CEO of any one of the big tech companies and say, hey, we got a little problem here, we need a little help. It's generally legal, but they would, they'd push it our way.
Generally, I mean, we have plausible
Actually,
deniability. They're all legal.
We're pretty serious about that.
Yeah, no. There's some great talents coming out with Anduril and some of
It's
the new
phenomenal.
companies, Shield AI.
Oh, I've spent time on their range.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, but be the next Anduril. We
Yeah.
have to change the procurement system that we have right now, which this is a bit of an overstatement, but not entirely. It's basically producing yesterday's technology for tomorrow's wars. Ukraine is actually producing tomorrow's technology for today's wars.
Yeah.
And it is just transforming. And, it's pretty easy to change software.
Yeah.
And if you write the contract right, you might actually be able to do it.
Yeah.
And have to not have a change order and get sued and everything else. Hardware is much tougher.
Yeah.
They're changing hardware on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and they're
the electronic
building
warfare,
drones in the field. It's just extraordinary.
It is. And again, think about thousands of them on the front lines.
All right, so one last, and then we're going to transition. What's next for David Petraeus?
David Petraeus is very happily employed as a partner at KKR.
I realize that, but what's on your mind?
Nearly 12 years.
12 years.
During which we've gone from 83 billion under management to 650 billion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been extraordinary.
We miss your teaching out here at USC.
I miss being out at USC.
And you're great. You wrote a great book with Lord Roberts.
Actually, there is another book.
All right.
So the next book is being titled From the Battlefield to High Command.
Okay.
It's about the very, very small number of military leaders who were exceptional on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And then in strategic command.
Yeah.
And you may recall that, in fact, in the book, in the introduction, we lay out the intellectual construct for strategic leadership that I developed before going back to Iraq as a 4-star for the surge. And it has 4 tasks. And this will be, you know, the John Chambers of the world who are in here and many others will understand this very quickly. The strategic leader, and this can be a startup founder, or it can be a CEO of an enormous organization, or commander of the surge in Iraq or Afghanistan. You have to perform 4 tasks really well if you're going to be successful. And the first one is the be-all and end-all, and that is to get the big ideas right, to craft the right strategy. In combat, you have to understand the nature of the war. You have to understand the human terrain, the physical terrain, how the country's supposed to operate, how it really operates, the neighbors, all of this, and not try to make it the war you'd like to fight, as we did in Vietnam for 13 years. We failed those on the ground. We had the wrong big ideas. Then you have to communicate them effectively, not just through the breadth and depth of the organization you're privileged to lead, but to everyone who has a stake in the outcome of it. In combat, that means America's mothers and fathers, not just the White House, number 10 and others. Then you have to oversee the implementation of the big ideas. This is what we normally think of as leadership. This is the example the leader provides, the inspiration, the energy. It's attracting the best and brightest like you do and hanging on to them and incentivizing them. It's allowing those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's the organizational architecture you design. It's the metrics that you use, and they have to be the right metrics too. The body count was the wrong metric in Vietnam because we had the wrong big idea that we could win a war of attrition with North Vietnam. And then it's how you spend your time. We called it our battle rhythm. It's just basically a schedule of recurring activities, and it's 7 days a week in combat. And on that battle rhythm, you have events, activities, meetings that enable you and force you to perform the 4th task, which is to determine how you have to refine the big ideas as the context evolves. And you do it again and again and again. And if you don't get that 4th one right, you end up like Kodak, which had 2,000 patents on digital photography when it was the king of film photography and services, failed to get there first, and it obviously is not remotely what it used to be.
Well, that's something for us to chew on. I think it's so important, leadership, and that we'll end on that note. We'll give David a hand first.